All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, sirs, welcome to tonight's special Friends of Air Force History and Heritage webinar, in which we're going to both launch the book Armageddon and Okra, an Air Force History and Heritage title that has been written by Wing Commander Dr. Lewis Frederickson, who's front and centre on my screen at the moment. And we're also going to launch our new Australian Air Campaign series. The order of the events for tonight will be very shortly, I'll pass across to Air Commodore John Meier, the Director General of History and Heritage, who will make a few comments about the campaign series in this particular book. When the Air Commodore is complete, I'll then pass across to Air Vice-Marshal Roberton as our guest speaker for tonight, just to launch the book itself. And then in response, Lewis will make a few remarks about acknowledging the book, etc. We'll then have a very quick pause while we set Lewis up to deliver a presentation on the book, which will be about 40 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of questions and answers. So with that out of the way, I'd like to now introduce Air Commodore John Meier, Director General of History and Heritage Branch, to welcome everyone and to also to launch this series. Sir, over to you.
Thanks, Fredo. Evening, sir. I'm glad you could make it. Very much appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, some of you know me, those of you don't. As Fredo said, I'm Director General of History and Heritage. I am the inaugural Director General of History and Heritage when the previous chief stood the branch up. One of our tasks was to reinvigorate the Air Force's history publishing program. We spent a lot of time talking about it, particularly Martin and I, then Fredo, and came out with a few ideas. I will make one apology before I continue. Those of you who are aware of the initial launch process for this, it was supposed to be at Amberley at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon with a Super Hornet, a Classic Hornet, a tanker and a Wedgetail behind us and a whole bunch of aircrew looking for the bar. That didn't occur because COVID got in the road. So, Lewis, this is not how we planned it, but that's just the way it is. We all have to do as we're told, and quite honestly, the book is fantastic, but it's not worth me having an interview with CDF wondering why there was a COVID outbreak from RAF Base Amberley. So, Martin and I started talking about it and we had some of our ideas. We realised that we were lacking a publication that would allow us to reach the masses, particularly in Air Force, the younger generation, the junior NCOs, the junior officers, and one that would also appeal to the general public. Being a lazy aircrew, well, I am, Martin's an ex-engineer, but I fastened on the idea of copying the Army Campaign Series. The Army Campaign Series has in excess of 35 books produced so far, and they cover technology, they cover campaigns, personnel, tactics and procedures. It's quite an extensive organised program, and while it was winning, they were making money out of their program, which wasn't our aim, but that's a pretty good combat indicator that whatever they were doing was going to work pretty well for us. Fortunately, by that time, we'd chosen the same publishing house, Big Sky Publishing, who obviously had plenty of experience doing Army. So essentially, we followed Army's format. The question was then, what book would we start in the process? And we just settled on something that had to represent the past and something that had to represent contemporary operations. Contemporary operations, well, certainly for the enthusiasts is great. More importantly, for the younger generation, the younger airmen and airwomen of the Air Force and the junior officers, that's what they understand, that's what they remember. And having Okra there was a particularly convenient topic for Lewis to work on. Lewis and I had many discussions, and in many ways, Lewis was the crash test dummy for the series. We had to work out the procedures of how we're going to do this, how would we do the editing, who would we get to do the illustrations, where would we find the images, which senior officers would have to look at the book to make sure we weren't going to go outside of our lane, and then we had to get the people involved, people who actually were on the operation, which Lewis has managed to do quite well. Lewis and I talked about the topic. We thought that Okra was particularly important. Lewis has got recent operational experience, like many of us have. So he had the ability to call upon his peer group at the wing commander level out in the field and get that information. So I won't talk any more about Lewis's book in particular, but as a heads up, Lewis is already tasked. Next year, he'll be writing a book on Taipan. Taipan, if you didn't know, was the Air Force's mobile and control and reporting unit in Afghanistan for 2 years. controlled half of the airspace in Afghanistan, and they were very, very busy, very busy deployment. So he'll be working on that. And not long, early next year, mid next year, I think, Fredo, from memory, we've got one on Mark Lax's produced on the Malaya emergency and confrontation, but that's from the Australian Air Force point of view. The books are all about the Australian Air Force. Former Commander A Mobility Group is working on one as we speak now on the C-130A, E and H. We Commander Martin Ball is also working on one on Operation Gateway, the longest operation the ADF has ever done, and it's still continuing. And then we've got two other folks who are looking at writing a series of books on our bases. One about the northern bases that we used for the defence of Australia in the Second World War, and another one on the Empire Air Training Scheme bases, which we had scattered around the country. And a final one, which will be on aeromedical evacuation, which is another role that the Air Force does. So there's quite a few coming out there. We plan to generate about 1 to 2 of these books each calendar year. So those of you who've got deep pockets, start looking for it and start saving your pennies. I'd like to hand back to Fredo, and he can take it from here. Thanks, Fredo.
Thanks, sir. And deep pockets, it's only $20 for a copy of the book in your local bookstore, or $10 for the ebook. So at that point, I would now like to just introduce Air Vice-Marshal Steve Roberton. Air Vice-Marshal Zed Roberton is a Category A fighter pilot who joined as a direct entry pilot trainee after completing a Bachelor of Science at Queensland University. The Air Vice-Marshal has flown fighter tours at No. 3 Squadron RAF Williamtown and an exchange flying F-18s with the United States Marine Corps. After completing joint staff tours and Command and Staff College, he deployed for Operations Slipper and Falconer, for which he was awarded a Chief of Air Force commendation. The Air Vice-Marshal commanded No. 75 Squadron before leading the transition to the FA-18F Super Hornets. He's commanded No. 82 Wing at RAF Amberley and completed the United Kingdom's Higher Command and Staff College course in 2012. Air Vice-Marshal Roberton was appointed as a member of the Order of Australia in 2012 and commanded the inaugural Air Task Group 630 on Operation Okra, for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. He took command of Air Combat Group in 2015 and went on to assume the Air Commander Australia role in May 2017. Following the completion of his time as the Air Commander in June 2019, Air Vice-Marshal Roberton has assumed the role of Head Force Design in VCDF Executive. So with the wealth of background there in operations, and particularly Operation Okra, there's probably no better person to launch this book tonight. Sir, Air Vice-Marshal Roberton, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Fredo. Thank you very much. Look, it's a real honour to be here and to be part of the recognition of the work here from Lewis Frederickson, Armageddon and Okra. Look, I genuinely believe that in the future, we're going to look back upon this era from about 2010 as the beginning of one of really enormous strategic change, but also change for the Royal Australian Air Force. Perhaps unprecedented is one of the most overused words in 2020, and it requires context. But Okra, or Armageddon and Okra, supports Mark Twain's theory that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Our more recent history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are as vital to capture as the history of our formation as an Air Force 100 years ago. You know, our shared history shapes who we are, and it often explains why we have become this way. This book does this in the most effective way, and through a series of stories and through the lens of our Air Force's people. So, you know, in this way, it's right on target, and it hits those multiple dimpies of the public, the services, our historians, and perhaps most importantly, the amazing RAF members at all ranks. You know, this history of this campaign and even this work, and I'm fortunate enough to actually have one of the hard copies, you know, it doesn't accurately capture, as most campaigns don't, just how crazy it was launching across 12,000 kilometres to the other side of the world, self-deploying, well inside preparedness directives, and facing, you know, the challenges that we just could not have foreseen. I guess it was one of those campaigns that went for a few years and very quickly became normalised. But even by the third rotation on Okra, it could not really have been accurately understood just what happened on the first one when we were making up targeting directives and the rules of engagement and building that international coalition on the fly. And like every challenge faced by the Royal Australian Air Force over its nearly 100-year history, it was made a lot simpler just through the agility of our people, the quality people and the solutions that they managed to derive in combat operations, the quality of the delivery, and there are statistics in there which drive home just how accurate the campaign ended up being. But what it doesn't capture is the amount of work in the enablers and the professionalism of the women and men of the Royal Australian Air Force, who on day 3 were asked to not just start leading multi-nation formations and coalition attacks, but actually became the benchmark across all of those areas within theatre. It is perhaps the thing of which I'm most proud of in my career. So, congratulations to Lewis Frederickson on this work. It's relevant, it's readable, it's very informative, and yeah, it's a great job, Fredo. Congratulations also to Air Commodore John Meier, JM, and the History and Heritage team for this outstanding work. It is really important, as I've said, to capture this, I believe, in everything we do. Perhaps as we are about to enter into our second century as an Air Force, really understanding where we've come from and why we are who we are can really only be told by people going to the trouble and an immense amount of work that goes in to capture the stories of the folks that participated. But perhaps more than that, just thank you. I really appreciate the living history being captured here. As I've said, really the next generations have got a lot more challenges ahead of them for the coming century of the Royal Australian Air Force. It's an honour to be here. Thanks, Fredo.
Thanks very much, sir. So at this point, I would now like to invite Lewis Frederickson to the floor. Lewis, Wing Commander Lewis Frederickson, Dr. Lewis Frederickson. Lewis is the Australian the Air and Space Power Centre's Fellow up at the Australian Defence Force Academy in Canberra. So Lewis, I'd like you please to take the floor.
Thanks, sir. Thanks very much. And Air Vice-Marshal Roberton, sir, it's good to see you again. And thanks for your kind words. And ladies and gents, thank you for having me along this evening. I suppose the phrase, "this is why I serve," never had a greater meaning for me this evening. It's my great honour to be here tonight to launch this short narrative with you. And as this goes, I believe that when we capture a nation's history through the record of its individual events, we also capture, in essence, the evolution of its people, its values, and its contribution to the world around us. I think this is very important. And as far as it's concerned, the Royal Australian Air Force has contributed to the development of Australia for almost all of our federated history as well. The period in time I've attempted to bookend in Armageddon and Okra is most important for proud institutions like the ADF, and particularly in terms of our evolving contributions to Australian society. The book gives my colleagues across all elements of our fine service a voice, and I believe that this snapshot in history that I've provided, particularly in terms of Okra, will commence an accessible record of Air Force's operations as the 21st century unfolds. It's been my privilege and honour to contribute into the service in this small way, but I must highlight, while my name's on the cover of the book, my contributions were very much part of a team effort. In particular, I'm most grateful to Air Force History and Heritage Branch, which commissioned the work, and I was most fortunate in having the branch's complete support as I researched and compiled the words. I must note, of course, the drive and energy of Group Captain David Fredericks, and equally, Daryl's not with us tonight, his contributions, Flight Sergeant Daryl Fell, in his compilation of the imagery for this first volume. A lot of people reviewed the work and went over it, and I'm most grateful to everybody. But in particular, I laughed and bickered with both David and Darryl Fell throughout the duration of the exercise. So, gents, thanks for your forbearance there. Equally though, Director General H&H, Air Commodore John Meier, was most generous in his brief to me. And as has been related, his words were straightforward: research, educate, entertain, underwrite the value of the Air Force. And to this end, he gave me access to records of interview and the valuable time of personnel at all levels, including our guest, Air Vice-Marshal Roberton, to pen the work. I was even commissioned to visit the Al Dafra Air Base to see operational activity firsthand when I assisted the Australian War Memorial in its historical mission over to the Middle East. More than anything then, it's Air Commodore Meier's vision for such bodies of work that have enabled us to chat here this evening. Of course, I couldn't get to everybody involved in the operation. I'm led to believe over 1,800 RAAF personnel deployed, but let me say, I'm honoured to have served in such fine company for over 30 years. So this short story is about them. It's for them, it's for their families, and it's for all of Australia. I hope this first volume in a series, there'll be a lot more, meets with your expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. And I think on behalf of everyone, a round of applause. What you've done in putting this book together as the first of our series is a fantastic effort. And you've led the way, as the Air Commodore pointed out, to numbers of authors. So we have Air Commodore Mark Lax here, who's doing the Malayan Emerging Confrontasi. We have Anna Goebbels online here, who's doing one on the EAT spaces, etc. This will be the start of a significant series of books, which is going to really set Air Force's history and heritage, as the Air Vice Marshal said, as the benchmark for the next century. So thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, at that point, we'll just take a quick break of probably 1 or 2 minutes while Lewis and I set up for Lewis's presentation. For those of you who wish to stay, please continue to join us. And for those of you who need to go now, thank you very much for participating tonight. All right. Thank you, Lewis. I'll just pause the